As a vegan, have you felt a deep anguish as you interact with the non-vegan world around you? Or as someone vegan curious, have you not made that change out of a fear of what you might learn and how it might hurt you? Hello, friends, and welcome to Season 7, Episode 125 of Did You Bring the Hummus podcast. I'm Kimberly, your host and vegan buddy, and I am super excited to be here with you today. Did You Bring the Hummus is a podcast for all things vegan. Before we get started, I have one very important question for you. Did you bring the hummus? Today, I am joined by Clare Mann, the vegan psychologist who coined the term Vystopia and wrote the book by the same name. We dig into what Vystopia means, how we can care for ourselves despite it, and how we can continue to inspire those around us to make compassionate choices. Hi, Clare. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Or your morning.
Well, that's right. We're trying to get our times around our heads around the times, aren't we? No, I'm in Australia, so this is my morning. Yes, great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you here. So as we always start here on Did You Bring the Hummus, share with me your vegan journey.
You know, all of us love these questions, but we also love the answers, don't we? Because I think it inspires us to realize that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I have so many stories of other people that have become vegan because I've shared so many people's stories, of course, in the course of my work. But it was a bit of a circuitous route. I'm not sure whether it's 16, 17 or 18 years ago that I became vegan. But I'll start by saying that I became vegan and I didn't know I was a vegan. I didn't know that's what a vegan was. So, but this sort of happened after 30 years of vegetarianism, when I became vegetarian on the spot, actually, after just reading about a cow going to slaughter. And it troubled me. So I didn't see anything or hear anything. And I can still, as I'm telling you now, trace her footsteps through that. And number one, I didn't realize I was so frightened. I never thought about it. I was in my late teens. And, but also just the horror of it brought home to, you know, the regular diet so many of us have of, for me, meat and two veg in the south of England was like, oh my gosh. And I became vegetarian on the spot and blissfully unaware as I carried on through life. And also people didn't talk about them. So I didn't even know what one was when I became one. So that shows how far we've come. So luckily, nature told me that I wasn't a baby calf. And so about 20 years in, I had this terrible skin condition, eczema. And I was told I was allergic to dairy. And overnight, it happened. But I realized I wasn't a baby calf. Nature knew better, which is great. So I had given up milk and cheese and all those sort of things. So I'm very blessed to feel that's come out of my body. So it's about 18 years ago. My partner and I were living in New Zealand. And one night we heard this terrible howling of dogs. And we had to go investigate. He was an omnivore when I met him and then soon became vegetarian. And I'd always been brought up that, you know, you don't just turn the music up and try to ignore if a child's crying next door, screaming next door. You go and do something. So we went and investigated. And that was really my first form of adult activism around animals. Really scary to go into a hunter's backyard and see where the dogs were. And I was horrified. These were what's called pig hunting dogs. And so this is an awful, heinous practice where dogs are starved up to 4 days. So they're so ravenous and so frustrated and in pain that they go out and hunt pigs. And it was not, so I saw this horror story and I remember these animals are apparently very vicious, but holding this dear dog's head in my hand, he had been scored by a pig and thrown back into the cage. And it was minus 4 degrees, I think. His paws were sticking to him. So I was hand feeding him. And we immediately took action. We got the SPCA involved. They took all the prisoners away. And we went, whew. there's a few bad apples that aren't going to exist anymore. And then that, I don't know why I was so naive. I've been a psychologist a long time. And then, of course, they cleaned the prisons up and all the animals went back, and I was horrified. So but the lovely thing is, when the students ready, those animals came to teach us that actually we need to look further. And so we did. And so shortly, we also came across the dairy industry there. And for anyone who just reads about this and hasn't heard this, when babies are taken away, they will cry and cry and cry. And honestly, it went on for 30 hours without stopping.
Wow.
But what is extraordinary, they all stopped at the same time. And I could say as a telling witness, the first time I ever heard that was, because they're out in the country, nobody can hear them, is that was the loudest silence I think I've ever heard.
Oh.
It was louder than the crying. But we went, oh my gosh, what's going on? Oh, well, they've taken the baby. What do you mean? And how naive as women that, as a woman, I thought, I've never thought about this. So I studied biology. This is crazy. So the long and the short of it, Brendan and I came back to Australia, and we did some research. He did some research. And he said, I think we got to sit you down. I need you to watch Earthlings, Crimes of Silence, which is animal testing, Meet Your Meat, Dairy is Scary. And we sat down, and there was a lot on Animals Australia about farrowing crates. I honestly didn't know, after everything I've been through before as my work and life, I didn't know I could hurt that much. I just thought, how do we know this? And so we said, we're not going to have anything to do with any of this, and we're just going to stop doing this. And there was that moment when I looked at him and said, do you think we're going to die? Oh. It's great, because now you can understand the silly laundry list of excuses people have, because we've been there. People aren't deliberately trying to justify animal cruelty. They don't like being lied to and having been lied to. So on that spot, we became vegan, but I became an activist as well. And I rang up Animals Australia, and there were only 7 people there at that time. We're now over 35 people. And I'm not an employee of there. I still support them and do a lot of support when I can. And I became an activist right away and just started to use my skills so that was it. And then a journey, of course, of more and more discovery, improved health, and of course the inevitable pushback, which I'm sure all our listeners here know what is going to happen on, and trying to tell people the reality. So that's my journey, I guess, in a nutshell.
That's I love hearing the journeys, and I love hearing how different they can be, and also how similar, because I went vegetarian overnight as well after a story about a cow. And once I really sat and thought about it years later, I was like, how did I go vegetarian after a story about a cow and didn't go vegan? And I sat with that feeling for a long time. And then I went vegan. I had already, being vegetarian, I was living at home. And so I had a lot of disposable income. So I was in a position, very luckily, to replace all of the leather sneakers and handbags and all of those things. I was able to give them away and get new ones that were vegan. So by the time I had reached this point, the only thing keeping me from being vegan was eating cheese and eggs. And so I hit a point in 2010 where I was like, okay, I'm going to be vegan. And I had gone vegetarian in 2001. And so I was vegan for a year, fully vegan. And then I don't know, I just had cheese one day, and I don't remember why or how, but then all of a sudden I was back on having cheese for until 2015, when I finally woke up again and was like, okay, no, I'm not doing this anymore. And now, here we are 10 years later, and it does help me when I'm talking to others and they're like, I can't do it, or isn't vegetarianism enough? And so I can come from that place of understanding, but then now it's kind of we had the internet and all that stuff in 2010, but we have so much more now. And it's almost how do people still have an excuse that they are not, once they're aware of it, that they aren't going all the way. And I know that that is a big part of kind of what your work is. So before we get into like those kinds of scenarios, for any of my listeners who aren't yet familiar with Vystopia and you yourself, Claire, my first question is that I noticed in the book that you don't describe yourself just as a psychologist, but also an existential psychotherapist. Can you explain what that is?
Yes, of course. And I am so blessed to have had that training. Because the vegan understands it. We have gone through such an existential shift. So just an easy way to understand it, existentialism is a philosophy of what it means to exist in the world. It's that thing where you say, what does it mean just to be here? What is this thing called life? We come in, we die, we live, we die. But what does it mean to exist? And what happens when life no longer exists in terms of we have a loved one who died? Where have they gone? What is this? Where did it, and then, of course, there's no shortage of explanations or religious teachings that will try and tell us what the truth is. But we are left with that ultimately. We still got to believe that, but it's still that doubt. Well, if it was so obvious, we'd all be doing it and thinking it. So let me just explain. A lot of psychology, for instance, is, let's have a little look, is trying to change behavior in that people are born with personality attributes, interests, from their genes, from their nature, nurture, they become certain people with interests, tendencies, attributes, aptitudes, those sort of thing. And so the person comes in and learns to be sort of thing. They emerge in their personality, and people can have children and say, gosh, I've got 2 children, they're chalk and cheese, okay, but they've had the same environment. The existential view, so that view, for instance, is almost what we call essence precedes existence. Let me just get it the other way, because I'll explain it. So it's when somebody gets pregnant, they're going to have a baby. They're not going to give birth to an elephant. I know it sounds crazy, but we have it. In other words, it's in the person's mind. I'm having a child, and their essence precedes their existence of coming in the world and being born. In the same way, you choose to create a podcast. It existed in your mind before it came to fruition. Its essence, podcastness, precedes existence. Now, the existential view is that it's the other way around. Existence precedes essence. Okay? So in the same way, if we plant an acorn, it turns into an oak tree. Essence precedes existence. Podcast comes into being. This is the other way. And it basically says we are thrown into the world in a set of circumstances. We've got a body. We've got a family, we've got a culture, we've got a time in history, we've got, am I the first child, second child, third, or the only one? We have parents who are religious, who are vegan, who are not vegan, and those circumstances shape our essence. So we come in with all the potentialities of what there is, okay? And that's why we go to different parts of the world and we see the power of culture. It's not a fixed thing, because if that Lebanese child was taken out and put in Bratislavan behaviors, attitudes, and whatever. But the existential view is that it comes to a point in our life when we start to realize that it's more a subjective reality, what we're going through. We have the power to change who we are in terms of our beliefs, our values, our habits. Now, the wonderful thing about veganism is that one of the biggest, I called it a stranger in a strange land. We wake up one day having lifted the veil, and everything is different.
Yeah.
We go to the dental surgery, and the leather couch that we sat on before is no longer a leather couch. That your mum said it's a good investment because it'll last forever. We see an animal skin. We don't see 2 girls having a cup of coffee laughing. We see a baby calf taken away from mum. We don't see a fancy new lipstick. We see animal testing. So that's an existential shift. The world is ostensibly the same, but actually the meaning making is different because we have come into a different world. Okay? Yeah. Now, people are doing this all the time. They have children, they get married, they lose a job. They do it in small ways, but there is huge resistance to stay the same. So that's really what an existential psychotherapist would work with someone who says, oh, I'm just one of these people, or I was born like this. And all of those are excuses as to why we can't change. It's just my personality. And we get it with the vegan thing. It's just my blood type and all this nonsense. Now, it may well be, there might be some factual thing, but it's the thing that it's relinquishing responsibility. And that's what's called existential. It results in existential guilt when you realize that that's just an excuse. Because if Kimberly can set up a podcast, you can't say, I could never do a podcast because I haven't got any confidence. She's okay. She's confident and eloquent. I'm not. Well, with training and expertise over time, and in all likelihood, that person could become a podcaster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's really, does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. Thank you for explaining that. I think that will help kind of frame some of the other things that we'll talk about as well.
Great. Yeah.
So thank you for that. Then the next thing I'd like you to kind of define, if you could, is the word Vystopia, which if people see your name, they typically will find that in their search as well. Can you explain what that means and where it all came from?
Yes, absolutely. Well, after becoming vegan and then taking to the streets and also using, because I originally trained as an organizational psychologist. And I think it's also fair. A lot of people think I came to this and I've had a professional training and all that. I actually left school at 16 with just a handful of what were called O-levels then. We did at 16 and went to work in a bank. And I realized very early on that was never going to work for me, but I didn't have the qualifications to do a degree or anything. So I worked in a nightclub and I worked in a bar as well as my secretarial job to save up to go to college. And I studied psychology because I was interested in the human condition. Now, let's fast forward, oh my gosh, 30, 40, 45, 50 years. Oh my gosh, yeah, it is getting to that. When I became vegan, I immediately started to be an activist as well. But I thought I was a psychologist and I was seeing people in private practice. And so people came to see me, so as a psychologist. Now, I was working in general practice before then. I had always talked about empathy and that sort of thing. But when I became vegan, of course, I saw the world differently. But people were still coming to me. And it was really, I started, as always, to get people referred to me. And a number of things happened, Kimberly. Doctors or psychiatrists would refer people to me and say that they had one of three conditions. Okay, the first was that they had eating disorders. Now, some people do have eating disorders. Some vegans have eating disorders. But people are not vegan because they don't have eating. They're vegan because they're horrified by what's happening to animals. But the doctor was saying they have an eating disorder because they won't eat animals. That was the first little red light. The second one is that they had social adjustment disorders because they wouldn't sit down for Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter and eat the traditional fare. Now I'm starting to get really annoyed now. Can you imagine the joy of some of them? They come to see me and they just can't resist, of course, because vegans can't. They're meant to be talking about themselves and then they start telling me, do you know where dairy comes from? Because I hadn't called myself. And I say, well, actually, I do. And of course, the joy. Can you imagine a young person coming to someone instead of the pushback, which does happen, I will talk about that probably later, and I told them I was vegan, it was, but the third one really troubled me, which led to Vystopia. Psychiatrists and doctors sent me people that they said had such low self-esteem that they were deliberately watching animal cruelty videos to hurt themselves. That is absolutely outrageous. And what an abuse of power. Yeah. To tell a person who's just, are you aware what happens to pigs in this, and then they say, oh, you've just got self-esteem, here's some medication, and you've got to, you're self-harming yourself. Absolutely horrifying. So I sort of thought, well, I really have to use my power that I've got vested in me to have a voice in these circles. And so I pushed back against the medical authorities and told them this is not something that can be pathologized. It's normal, predictable, and desirable, a response of someone to have at the horror of our speciesism. But it's much easier if you can actually come up with a word, because then you can say what it is and what it isn't. And it also empowers us as vegans to say, no, this is something, it's not a mental pathology. It's actually a desirable human empathic response of any decent human being. And that's why people run from the room screaming, because most people they don't agree with cruelty. So let's have a look. So this was the definition. So it's Vystopia, which sounds like dystopia or utopia. A dystopia, is, of course, is a dark and torturous, greedy, selfish world. And a utopia is an idealistic world. And I believe we are creating it, of kindness, empathy, support, abundance, joy, those sort of things. So I wanted a word that would explain the vegan dystopia, the horror of what we found out, and then people push back and all that stuff, and then also where we're potentially going. So the definition of dystopia, it's got three parts. The psychological anguish of discovering the systematized, normalized, legalized cruelty towards animals, institutionalized cruelty towards animals in our society at every level. Okay, from not only what we eat, what we wear, military exercises, religious experiments, circuses, right across the board. So first is the psychological anguish there. The second one is a secondary aspect of dystopia, is that when we tell people, instead of them being, oh my God, tell me more, I need to find out, they tell us we're over-exaggerating. Mm-hmm. And my dad he loved his animals. Mums and dads, I only get my meat from organic farms. The government would never allow it. We all know the laundry list of excuses. Mm-hmm. And so instead of the person feeling, oh my gosh, as soon as I tell people, the world will change, we all go through this naivety, we get this pushback, we get ridicule, laughter, being told we're preachy. And so there's this secondary anguish is, what do people really like? This is existential overlay again. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, I thought people were pretty reasonable, but they're all psychopaths.
Yep.
Which they're not. There are some, but you've been there. Of course, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
You see. And you go, oh my God, and people I love, my otherwise reasonable family, who are they? Mm-hmm. And then it breaks, and we have alienation, we have anger, we have frustration, we have loneliness, really. And then we go, well, oh my God, it gets even worse, because if I didn't know about all this hidden on my dinner plate, hidden in my lipstick, in my cleaning product, in my church, or whatever, what else don't I know? And then we're called a conspiracy theorist. And that's a word that silences people, because people think of Little Green Men or the last few years when, it must be people denying something, as opposed to us opening it up and going, I think we need to ask more questions. So that's dystopia.
Thank you for that. When I first heard that word and the definition, and you using the word anguish, it just hit me right in my heart, because that really does capture it. And because it is so overwhelming when you are faced, as you were saying, with like understanding this systematized, fully legal process that these billions of animals go through for a few moments of what people have determined is pleasurable on their tongue. And then you think about, like, that night that I went vegetarian overnight, I was up the entire night, physically sick, because I could not stop thinking about all of the animals I had eaten at every single meal before that point. And the pain was so awful. And then the next day, like I told my parents, like I said, I was still living at home. So I told my parents, and I didn't like vegetables and I didn't know how to cook. And they were like, okay, I guess, but this is not going to stick. Like, they didn't believe in it. And then, I wanted to shout from the rooftops, how do you not know about this? Like, even though I hadn't known about it until the night before. And I had people who were saying things like, you know what? Call me again when you're normal. And yeah. And just not like, not only did they not want to hear it, they didn't want me in their life anymore. And it was, you talk about the loneliness and this feeling of just, the world, you're like you wake up. It's just what you were saying. Like, all of a sudden the world is different, and the people around you who you loved and cared for, it does feel like they are psychopaths, because how, after you tell them about these things, do they not even say, like you said, tell me more. They're not curious in a lot of scenarios, and that is really hurtful. So when you find other vegans, and when you're lucky enough, I guess, when you're referred by a doctor to a vegan psychologist, that's great because they must have felt so seen and heard. It's just like it. I'm thankful that there's this word and that you and I are here having this conversation about it. So more and more people can learn and understand. And if I can, there's a section in your book, there's a sentence about how the assumption that only vegetarians and vegans bring their values to the table. And I remember that so clearly because, I went vegetarian when I was 20. And so I was still dating and young, and like, I don't have children, but at that point I didn't know I wasn't going to have children. And, so friends would say things like, you can't raise any kids vegetarian. Like that's pushing your views on them. But any parent who feeds their children the same way that they feed themselves is pushing their values on those children too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's right. I hope that released you from that as well, because it is we do too much of what I call the heavy lifting. Think of it like a bodybuilder or something. People ask questions and we tend to defend. Well, let's get them to defend what they're saying as well. It's more equal. But you're absolutely right. We have the one story, don't we, of a vegan baby died because their parents paid them this. Well, if there's only 1% of us, which I incidentally do not agree with, I think it's probably nearer 3% more, because I keep coming out, not everybody calls themselves, in the public eye or social media or answers, surveys. But I'm coming across, they're coming out the woodwork, they're like the French resistance, they're everywhere. But it's, I've just lost track of what I was just, the values, that's right, is everyone brings their values to the table. Is when the baby dies, for instance, this child died. Well, say it was 99%, no other children died. And there's a heck of a lot more in that sort of, but this one has to be held up. Now, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm going to call them powers that shouldn't be. I think, is it the government? Is it above the government? Is it the media, which is controlled by 6 major corporations, which has sadly moved away from journalism? I think we have to admit to that. It's also engineered these days for whatever narrative needs to be said, is you get this enormous reaction. And I always say that when the reaction is out of proportion to the threat, there's something else going on. When people, react, they make these stories up, or people say these things. I think there's a number of things. I think there is a collective guilt, because no one's going to go, hey, I love hurting animals, or why there's such a resistance? If you're so confident that you're happy with what is going on, then try to persuade me to think differently rather than try to get angry at me. Why don't you convince me that I'm a fool, that I've actually got the wrong end of the stick? And so I always say to the vegans, when we get that pushback, see it as a positive. Because if people are indifferent and go, I don't really care, they're very different than the people that react. The reactors are much nearer to veganism than we realize. Now, are we going to get angry with them, get them annoyed, so they transfer that anxiety and anger onto us? Mm-hmm. Or are we going to allow us to be a little mirror held up to them so that they have to look at the disconnect between what's going on inside and what they're doing? Whereas I think we do them a disservice if we attack, because it gives them the excuse to go, that's why I'm unhappy, because all these people tell me what to do. Mm. Kimberly, go away until you've got over this problem. How painful that was for you, but you realize that they were much nearer. If you rang up and said, I'm sorry, I'm gluten free. Well, when you sort yourself out, you can come and talk to us. And yet they will insist it's a diet and telling everyone what to do. So, yes, it's an interesting, we've got a lot of work to do. We have to be, all of us, we are all psychologists anyway, I believe, trying to make sense of this human condition. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That made me think of, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I'm not trying to run through your book in order, but I had some other things. But since you mentioned it, you have near the end of the book talking about how we're all kind of salespeople for veganism. And I fully agree with that. I feel like every day, every choice I make, everything people see me doing is me showing them what it is to be vegan and hopefully how easy and wonderful it is to be vegan. And, immediately in my own life, my husband went vegan and my mom went vegan because of their interactions with me. Wow. So it's like, I've got this tiny little, survey going on, and so far so good, I guess. But yeah, this idea that we need to all kind of show up. And I think in some ways you can feel almost pressured, like, oh my God, I have to be the perfect vegan. And I think that I'm kind of a good example that way too, because I have had people who, because I'm in a larger body, they have looked at me and accused me of not being vegan, asking me when I'm sneaking cheeseburgers kind of thing, because vegans can't possibly be fat. Meanwhile, we have tons of amazing vegan comfort foods that I'll admit that I have lived on for periods of my life.
Love you.
But it can feel kind of overwhelming to think, well, I might be the only vegan someone ever meets, so I better be on my game. But I think it comes through in what you say, is that if we're being like authentically us and being vegan as we are in our lives, then we are going to be effective and having a conversation that plants a seed, whether they go vegan because of us or someone else. I guess if you want to expand on that a little bit, I don't know if I covered it properly.
Well, firstly, I'm horrified that a vegan would say that to you is actually, and that very un-vegan activity, because it's said in a disparaging way, and also with a set of myths that there's only a certain way to look or be. Is because I like Dr. Will Tuttle, who wrote The World Peace Diet. I love his definition of veganism. He said it really is a philosophy of loving kindness. It's ahimsa. Loving kindness towards ourselves, to all other people, even the pre-vegans, let's call them pre as opposed to non, and all other living animals and all ecosystems. So what is that vegan, in the same way that we're trying to help pre-vegans expand their loving kindness towards other animals and other species, there's a lot of vegans, that person included, or those people, that actually need to expand their loving kindness towards others. And also, why did they feel they had to point that out to you? I'm sure when people criticize it, it's often because there's something lacking within themselves that they feel it's easy to put it over there, which is, so I think that's the first thing I almost want to say is, and I don't think we need to be the body beautiful and the athletes and whatever, unless that's what we're doing. I think that's different.
Yeah.
But do we really think we're that powerful that if we just have the body beautiful and we're at the gym, and I know people like going to the gym, but I prefer to walk the dogs and, swim and do fun things and garden. But, do we really think we're that powerful that if we look perfect, that we look 30 years younger than we are, that we're vibrant, we're healthy, we're happy, we're abundant, they will go, oh my gosh, I have to become like you, were we really that powerful? If we were, then we'd all be doing it, and then the world would be vegan tomorrow. It doesn't work like that. And I think also it works in reverse ways. People look at that and think, I could never have that. Or, if people just see their own uniqueness and, specialness, that's really what this is all about. And I have a dear friend actually runs an animal rescue. She's rescued over 5,000 dogs and rehoused them. And she's very big. And people go, I've never seen a fat vegan. She said, well, it's the first time for everything. And she said, if you did as much rescue as I did, and you got 3 hours sleep a night, you'd probably be living on junk food too, which I don't think is the best for her. I think she could nurture herself a little more. But it's also just, that's another thing, I guess. So I think the best thing we can have is what really in one sense happened to me. My husband and myself, we were living he isn't different than my partner, by the way. I just got in the habit of calling him my partner. It isn't a separate person. That'd be very risque, vegan. I keep losing my track. Oh, sorry, listener. See, this is the only thing is we are just normal vegans. We're not perfect. That's right. So we moved out of Sydney and we lived in rural New South Wales for quite a while. Largely, it's just a reset over the last few years and everything that had been happening. Little did I know that was going to be 3 years of undercover work, really, that I was exposing. I didn't choose to do that. I didn't deliberately, but I was just a member of the very small community. And oh my gosh, the council said you were the person. Yes, we know. Here she is again. How can we help you? Because I called out so many things. I saw so much firsthand. I've been bailed up by pig hunters. And so it's a great experience, I have to say, but it's taken me a little while to recover from that. But why am I saying that? Is because we used to go to a swimming pool regularly, and the person, if they saw us in the local cafe, there was really only one or two, and it would always be a soy coffee and avocado on toast, because that's all there was, and eating usually outside. They kind of knew we were full vegetarian. Never pushed it, nobody ever asked, never hid it, whatever. And then one day she offered me some eggs that were local to the area. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, no, I don't eat eggs. In fact, I don't eat any animals." "Well, they're not really, well, they're actually part of the animal's body, and I know quite a bit about." She looked at me and she said, "Are you a vegan?" and I said, "Well, it depends what you mean by vegan, and what do you understand?" That's a very important thing. When someone asks us something, always reply with a question. Because we need to know where they're coming from to answer appropriately. And she said, "Well, it's one of those fussy vegetarians." I could have told her she was going to say that anyway, but it came out of her mouth, which is important because then she's got a visual. She said that, and she said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "Well, according to that, I guess, in one sense, that's what I eat, one of the consequences, but it's, it's a philosophy really of doing everything we can." She said, "So you're vegan, but you're really nice." But that taught me something, is how many vegans had she met in the middle of the rural country area? Very few. But the image, the propaganda, it said that they're difficult, preachy people putting farmers out of work. And I thought that was a great form of advocacy. And she looked at my partner, Brendan, and said, "I bet you're not vegan." He said, "Well, actually, I was vegan before she was." And they said, "Oh, that's probably why you look so well," or something like that. So, but that's we weren't trying to hide it. It was just, it hadn't really come up, And then they look and they go, "Actually, yes, no, you call us out on the horse racing. Yes, you call us out on the goat racing and you had those sheep removed from the back of that garden with no water, and you had that dog that was chained up, taken away, and and then they suddenly see it and they go, 'Oh, so I suppose that's what a vegan is.'" I said, "Yeah, what you eat is just a consequence of not." I said, "Actually, you're a vegan. It's just that you eat meat." She said, "What?" I said, "Well, you've taken in rescue animals that have been thrown out on the street. You don't believe it's wrong to bash animals, but you eat meat. And really, when we do that, we're kind of paying other people to do what we don't agree with." And she went, "Oh, never thought about it like that." So meeting people where they're at is really important. So
yeah, it is. And I've had this conversation with other guests before and with just people in my everyday life where it's like, I want so badly for the world to change and for everybody to be vegan right now because of how much suffering happens. And, when I think about someone who takes their time, or even me having been vegetarian for 14 years, it's like I took all this time and all of those lives and I didn't need to. And if I could somehow help people see that and feel that in order to make that change too, like I want them to, but then I understand, and you mention it in the book too, about how sometimes making a change overnight is great, but it doesn't stay, but if people take their time and they find their way, kind of like the way when you were talking to that woman, she heard, in her own, like, things she was saying, and that was able to connect what you said with kind of what she had said. And it becomes like something that's, I do believe that animals shouldn't be harmed. So if I'm paying someone else to harm them for me, and a much more powerful way. And then to have her walk away with that thought, like maybe she went vegan in a week. Maybe it took her 6 years, but maybe that means that on that path that she'll stay, and then she'll end up vegan for the rest of her life, which is really what we want, right? It's it's hard though to hold back sometimes.
Oh, you think enough already? It's so blindingly obvious. And do they know? I say they know, but my diet is so much better. Today I'm making a mushroom and lentil lasagna with a cheese sauce with sweet potatoes, yeast flakes, a little bit of cider vinegar, and it's going to be so delicious. You're going to have all the taste, all the beautiful comfort food, but you're not going to feel heavy as you do. And then with all the, animal, secretions, it's pretty vile when you think, but this is how duped people can be. You've got grown men telling us that soy milk's going to make you into a big girl, and they're drinking the breast milk of another. It's actually mind-blowing, but it should give us an idea of how duped people are and how shaped we are. But I want to give a little example here. The agony, as you say, of this is, it's really important. I think your story is us telling the stories of our own experience is very powerful, rather than trying to change their consciousness, which we can't do anyway.
Yeah.
Because often you can be reading a book, can't you? You can read an autobiography or even a novel, and you see yourself within it with that potential. And I think your story and my story is more powerful to go, oh my, and I often act a little bit, I'm not here to dupe people in my pre-vegan conversations with people, but I often go, oh my God, you never guess what I found out. I was watching this documentary last week. Well, watched Dominion a long time ago, and I watched Except for this. But I say it as if I'm a regular human being, which I am, that has come across this. Yeah. As opposed to, do you know about casomorphines in milk, and that's why we're addicted? It's better to say, oh my God, I found out something the other day that blew me away. I can't believe how much we've been lied to. Can I tell you? Now, this is a very important neuroscience technique in many ways. Ask people, even if people are asking you or something, ask if you can tell them. Mm-hmm. Because when somebody says yes, there's a unconscious, I believe it is, thing is that they could say no if they wanted to. So number one, they can't call you preachy because they just said, yeah, please tell me. Right. And you engage with them and they feel the barrier goes down a little bit. Mm. And I think of an example when I was living in rural Australia. I really want to write about this, but I realized how much it caused me a lot of pain, what I experienced and what I did and exposed and had to look at. But I'm glad for the experience, really am. And of course, we just can't help ourselves, can we? If it's on our doorstep, you have to do something. But I started walking with someone, and she's every day walking dogs and things, my own dogs, and early morning. It had to be very early because it was very hot over there at that time of year. And every time, and of course, you get up early, you get up at 5 o'clock, slaughterhouse trucks are going to go through the country, Oh, the cowardice of not wanting people to see it, of course. Mm-hmm. And I would stop everyone and just speak to the animals and say something, even though they were passing. And she'd say, oh, don't upset yourself, don't do this. I said, I'm sorry, I know where they've come from and I know where they're going. All for nothing more inconsequential than your taste buds. Our taste buds. Another technique, our taste buds. Mm-hmm. I'm not eating them, but we're as human beings.
Right.
And she'd go, oh, no. And, I counted how many, and that was just those early mornings. There were 512 of them that I stopped at.
Wow.
Now, what was interesting, 3 months into this, she looked at me and said, I was brought up on a sheep farm and they would come and get the sheep. But ever since you've told me about this, I can't look at it in the same way. Hmm. Yeah. So this is our, when we get repeated exposure to people, this is very helpful. Now, then one day she said to me, are you going to go to the horse racing? And you understand this. It's like an irritation. It's like, you don't get me at all. Yeah. And of course, why should they? Why? They don't know the full extent. Don't horses love running around the fields? I'm sure, this silly old myth. We must treat people like intelligent idiots, really, in these journeys. And I said to her, because I had the background, I may not have said it to someone else. I would have asked a question. I said, do you know something? I'm all for going to a party, putting on a nice frock, having a glass of champagne and dancing. But I can't see that we have to thrash a defenseless mare around a course to get to that point.
Yeah.
Oh, she said, I've never thought about it like that. And, and I didn't say it in a critical way. I said, oh, come on, we're better than this. We can have the party. We can have the fun. Now, it's very easy to get annoyed at that and thinking, how many conversations have we had? But she didn't see it. But I use an example here it's like somebody goes on holiday, and back in their home, well, let's say on their hometown, they've had a neighbor telling them about child slavery and working in sweatshops to create cheap t-shirts. And this neighbor is trying to get this person to change. Please don't buy the t-shirts. Do you know what's happening to those children? I'm trying to do a fundraiser. And that person, it's not that they're not concerned about it. It's the fact that they're concerned about other things, or they have their own problems trying to pay their bills or whatever. So they think it's awful. They disagree with it. If they can stop buying the t-shirts from there and get an equally cheap one, they might go over there, but it's not touching them. Then that person goes on holiday and they stay in a small motel in this country, and the maid there, or the person cleaning the rooms, tells them about their own child who was in slavery in a sweatshop. And that this person's now got this fantastic job cleaning this hotel, so they don't have to do that and they can put their children to school. Suddenly, that person who knew about slavery, child sweatshops, suddenly is a telling witness. They come back, they start fundraising, they tell people about t-shirts. And I see it like this with veganism, is actually we could share the information. We never know where it's going to land. It's often when people get a personal experience, something happens. So it may be the horses that she was doing a lot of voluntary work looking after old people in the town. She just hadn't made the emotional connection with the suffering of the other. And particularly farm animals are kept very far away from people, of course. They're not seen as individuals to the public. They're seen as herds or, and so I use that example. So how can we accelerate that process is really what we're asking.
Yeah.
I think it's through our stories. It's through, talking about the experiences you've had, that, you were sick to your stomach. I so hear that. I know myself, when I saw about farrowing crates and mother pigs unable to move, my partner was away at the time, and I just got this, I just rescued a 15-year-old German Shepherd Kelpie, and I woke up, that's why I knew that the time was and how long I'd been out. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and as I was drinking it, this pain came right up as I was thinking about what I'd seen the night before. The pain came right up with it, and I passed out. It literally was heartache. And the reason I know it is because I felt like Bridget Jones in that film, the eaten by German shepherds. It was a German Shepherd Kelpie who was trying to wake me up. And that's how I knew I was out for about 25 minutes. And that was pure grief. And so I absolutely hear often my response to seeing something, I feel I want to throw up. I feel I don't live. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And, but then I realized that was, and we've got to usher people into encouraging, as psychotherapists say, encourage the shudder. We want, that's not, but not so much that they shoot the messenger. And that's where it's that relationship-based advocacy, which is really important. And trance-breaking communication, I think we mentioned, we've spoken in the past.
Yeah. It's, I just lost my train of thought.
We're going this. I think we'd be very good sort of, we'd be very good at stand-up comedy. That would be a good one as well.
But the power of story and the power of relationships, it really does transcend all things, right? And that's why I think farm sanctuaries, and not just me, it's not just my thought, that farm sanctuaries can be so powerful, because these farmed animals are there and people can see them, and sometimes they get to interact with them, but there's also stories. So even when you're on a tour, the tour guides will say, this is where so-and-so came from. And they all have names, and then you hear the story and you see their sweet faces. And sometimes get to interact. But even if you weren't on a tour, there are, boards with stories up around at where everyone lives. And so you read this and you interact with the being whose story you've just read. And it does, what did they say? It's like one story is one person is a tragedy, a million people is a statistic. And
Yes.
and that's how, when we are interacting with that individual animal or with another person who's sharing their story, that we're able to feel something different and be able to make a change. And it's just incredible. And I just looked at the time, and it feels like I've been talking to you for like 5 minutes, but it's been almost an hour. I can't believe that, Claire.
I know. I think we started a little bit late, so we did chat for a few moments.
Oh, we did. Okay. But do you have a couple extra minutes, or because I've got one more
Yes,
question,
of course.
but I could throw in an extra question
I
as
could.
well.
I'd like to comment on what you've just said about sanctuaries.
Please do.
Sanctuaries are what my dear friend Matthew Holtman says. He wrote the book Joyful Case for Becoming Vegan. And it's a notion that I've held, maybe his wording is better. He says, when we often focus on oppression and what the problems are, and have a look at this footage and look at this and whatever. But when we look at flourishing, we see what oppression takes away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important, because the majority of people go past the field and they're the sheep in there. We go past the field. You and I will go past it. We're in the rainy season at the moment, and it's been pouring with rain at night, which is wonderful because it's great for the garden and whatever. But all I can think about is those animals. They have no shelter. They just have to suck it up and lie in a pool of water all night. Yeah. This is heinous. They're like anyone else. They go for shelter. They go for, a dry bed. They don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. In fact, when the rain comes. So, it's these sort of things. But I think it's telling the stories, look at what it takes away, and look at the huge benefits of becoming vegan. There are not only alignment with our actions and our behaviors, lifted, you suddenly feel that everything's in alignment. But you do, even if we're eating comfort food, you will, when we eat the flesh and reproductive secretions of others, not only is it heavy and hard to digest and it's full of toxins but we're eating the grief and pain, which is really reflected in our society. Angry, antidepressants, people are, taking in so many pharmaceuticals just by what they're eating, because the animals have them to keep them. So, and when we look around, I feel like saying to people, and they say, "Oh, veganism is not a good." I said, well, "How's it working for us?" We've got a massive increase in the 6 major lifestyle illnesses, all attributed to animal products. Mm-hmm. So we've got all the facts are there, all the science is there, all the common sense is there, all the heart is there, because people do not deliberately want to. We have got to become exquisite communicators, to tell stories, to invite people to think, oh my gosh, that would, me too. It's a good me too.
Yeah. That I love that. And if we can just become those storytellers and just share ourselves, our lives. And I always say that going vegan is the most beautiful decision I've ever made. And I believe that every single day that I wake up. Was it Tolstoy who said, as long as we have slaughterhouses, there will be war? It may be.
Yeah, no, he did say, I think it was a philosopher called Moreno originally. Okay. But Leo Tolstoy did say that. And how true is that?
Yeah.
As long as we have slaughterhouses, we'll have battlefields.
Yeah.
And, it's one of the best. And also we discover our purpose. I think this is the thing. It becomes such a big why that we'll take anyhow, because you can't, the only respite, I think, for Vystopia is to turn it into massive action. Now, whether that's running a podcast on the world stage, making vegan potlucks, having a conversation with people at the train station, each of us have to do something. There is no, once we have because if not, the burden of knowing will become too great.
Yes.
And we are the ones we've been waiting for. We've been called to do this. How much more worthy that, we are part of history, ushering in a kind of world. I can't think of anything better.
Yeah. Yeah. We're like, this is revolutionary. This is significant what we're doing. And, yeah. And it really is beautiful. And I love Matt's approach too about just, that joy and abundance and looking at where all the things we get, all the benefits, not just us, the animals, the planet, everything, when we are living a vegan life. And it is beautiful. Claire, thank you so much for this. I've, like I said, I really felt like the time just flew by. I'm so thankful for this time with you. I've got one more question for you. How does hummus?
I think I know what it is.
How does hummus show up in your life?
I mentioned to a couple of people that I was coming on the podcast, and they just as vegans, they go, "Yeah, we know what, we know why you're even asking that question." If people go to potlucks with people and they always say, "Well, I knew you were vegan, so I brought some hummus."
Yeah.
Nothing else, of course. It's it's interesting because I do eat hummus, and I had the great fortune in my early part of my life. I was working for a university and we were involved in open learning, which meant that I was able, on this paid position, to travel around the world and help people develop their own open learning thing in different countries. And so also I lived in England, so it was easier to go across the Mediterranean countries. But I went to a lot of countries like the Middle East, and of course to Turkey and just trying to think off the top of my head, but the ones that all in Greece and Spain and Portugal and Italy, and they all say that they created hummus, all of them. Everybody says, "Oh yeah, but it first came here." Mm-hmm. And so everybody will have, particularly in Middle Eastern fare, and there are all sorts of different ways to make it. So I've been looking for the wonderful recipes to do it. And instead of, I know some of your guests have said, put ice cubes in it, is a Middle Eastern recipe is to add cumin, of course, and to add hot water as you're making it. And it makes it really smooth and creamy. Then you have to put it in the fridge, of course, to do it. I don't add any oil to mine now. I used to. I think it's like a lot of things. I cook mainly without oil, unless it's scrambled tofu. Mm-hmm. And the large reason is because we've all been duped into thinking we need to do it to make it really tasty. And it's not true. And so I don't add oil at all. I would make it with chickpeas. I would make it with lemons, garlic, salt and pepper, maybe some cumin and tahini. And there's enough oil in the tahini, really. We don't need to add a load of olive oil. We've got enough in there. And so hot water is the answer. And it's a mainstay. And isn't it absolutely delightful too?
I'm going to give that a try. I have not tried the ice cube or the hot water. So that's fun that I've got to try out. I have found it's interesting how like every batch of hummus never comes out the same, or at least for me, that's the case. And I have made some very terrible hummuses and some really wonderful ones, and I never know what I'm going to get.
Yeah. And another one is actually adding beetroot as well. Beetroot in hummus is absolutely delicious.
Oh, and beautiful.
And, which is great. And then, these are meals in themselves, either on things or just with, roast potatoes or boiled potatoes or any potatoes as a sauce instead of something else. Mm-hmm. But thank you for that. It's I do have a little invite for people if you don't mind me adding
please.
that.
Yeah, go right ahead.
I periodically, although I'm making some changes to the actual structure of this, but I periodically run free 3-day Beyond Vystopia masterclasses. And in 1 hour a day, I give people tools and techniques, how to navigate Vystopia and become better communicators. I say the format of this is changing. But if that resonates with people and people want to access that, gives me an opportunity also to invite people to tell them what I do in life and whether they, need my help in other ways. But it is, wonderful free training, which we do because I want a vegan world. Mm-hmm. And so people just go really on to veganpsychologist.com. There will be a wait list there you can join. But if not, it's veganpsychologist.com/master-class-register.
Okay, awesome. I'll make sure to include that link in the show notes so people can click right in and get to your page so they can join your wait list. And then any social media or any other websites that you have will be linked in the show notes as well, so people can connect with you when whatever way works for them. Claire, thank you so much for this. I'm really so thankful that we've had this time together and that you're here sharing your wisdom and inspiration with my listeners and the world.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everything you're doing. For my absolute pleasure. And to everyone listening, to say a huge thank you. Each of us bring our gifts and our unique talents to the world. Don't compare yourself with anyone else. Be a voice for animals, for health, for vibrancy, for a kinder world. And just get out there. And if you had a bad day, pick up the thing tomorrow and just keep going. We're all part of the creating a solution of a kinder world.
Welcome back. I remember how seen I felt when I learned about Vystopia. Through my vegan journey, I have felt discouraged, lonely, overwhelmed by what I knew and what it seemed those around me, those I loved, refused to acknowledge. Building my own vegan community, both in person and online, has helped a lot. I have a little vegan bubble I can retreat to where I can connect with people who understand, often without me needing to say a word. How are you managing? Do you have your own vegan bubble? To connect with Claire, visit either website, veganpsychologist.com or vystopia.com, and sign up for her next free Vystopia masterclass at veganpsychologist.com/masterclass register. There'll be links for all of these in the show notes. I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Please subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're loving it, please give Did You Bring the Hummus a 5-star rating and leave a review. It's an easy way to keep supporting the show. Be sure to share these episodes with your friends. If you're finding something good here, they will too. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Did You Bring the Hummus, and visit my website, didyouBringTheHummus.com, for more information about me, updates on what I'm working on, new podcast episodes, and all things vegan. Tune in next time for my interview with Forrest Tierce, U.S. Project Director at Dharma Voices for Animals. We talk Buddhism, the incredible work Dharma Voices for Animals does, finding peace within our path, and so much more. Thanks for listening.